We're joined now by Mr. K.V. Subramanian, who is, of course, Executive Director at the IMF and also is a former CA of India. Thank you so much for speaking to us, Mr. Subramanian. Let me begin by asking you, we are at a time when Prime Minister Modi is coming in. He is one of the first few world leaders who President Trump is meeting during his second tenure. Of course, a sign of how much importance US attaches to India and, of course, the relationship between the two leaders. What are you expecting from this visit?
So, as all of us certainly know, I think the personal relationship between President Trump and Honorable Prime Minister Modi is a very good one. And at the highest level, these aspects do matter. I know, apart from the way in which India was so well treated when our External Affairs Minister was actually treated so well during the inauguration. So I think there are very high expectations, and rightly so, because in my opinion, actually from the vantage point that I occupy, I can see that India-US is really the partnership, of the next couple of decades. Given the economic opportunity that India offers, for instance, investors, American investors, actually, for them to be able to earn more than 10%, returns in a year in dollar terms, not just in rupee, actually something that there are few other large countries that can provide such an opportunity. So from that perspective, I think, and President Trump is clearly, very, very focused on ensuring that, that the economy, the American economy, does well. So in that perspective, I think there are clearly paths that converge. So I actually think that this visit would be one where there could be some important steps that could be announced.
Right. One of the things and areas of concern has been, the entire talk around tariffs. Now, one thing is about political rhetoric, but he's actually walked the talk when it comes to China, Canada and Mexico. But again, Canada, Mexico is on hold for a month is what we are told. How serious an issue do you think this is that is going to impact upon India?
So I think, from the Indian perspective, and, you would note that the Indian budget, the recent budget that was passed as well, took some important steps in this regard. I think the other aspect that actually, that needs to be focused on, when I think about overall trade between two countries, I don't focus just on one aspect of which is basically goods trade, and within that, tariffs actually. Ideally, the conversation needs to be, and especially from an Indian perspective, needs to be in the form of a 2x2 matrix where you have both goods and services and tariffs and non-tariff barriers as well. And there is some very good research that's been done by the WTO that shows that India, for instance, uses far less non-tariff barriers. And, that research shows as well that non-tariff barriers are more subjective and are oftentimes, far more opaque as well. So this is an aspect that I think India should be highlighting as well, because, some of these non-tariff barriers also affect the comparative advantage that India has, which is on the service sector side. So in my opinion, I think, this conversation actually would be far more beneficial if it is looked at it in a more holistic perspective, not just focused on goods trade and that too on tariffs, rather than that actually across this 2x2 matrix, all the four, so goods and services and tariff and non-tariffs as well. I think that is where there can be actually a lot of common ground, in my opinion.
Right. Because one of the interesting things is that when you were speaking also against BRICS and imposing tariffs on BRICS, he was basically responding to a proposal about trying to de-dollarize, all this economic transactions. Is that something that is even practically possible in your view?
See, when one views, at this point in time, clearly dollar is the dominant currency, and at this point in time, on the horizon, one doesn't see any other currency that can actually take the place of the dollar. So I think the dominance of the dollar in international trade and also from international reserves is something that actually will continue.
Right. What are the other areas that you see cooperation between India as well as the United States? And, economic cooperation is, of course, one aspect, but the two countries also have huge strategic convergence when you look at it. Common threats, there is the role of China, for instance. All of these aspects also would be very important. One cannot take away from that.
Correct. Here I think, I'm sure policymakers on both sides do appreciate that India, is a country that brings a certain dimension of leadership, ethical leadership, to the table. there are two aspects that I want to point out. In its history, India has never ever been an aggressor. Of course, when somebody basically commits an act of aggression, we defend very, very stoutly. Secondly, India has never ever defaulted on any of its obligations, and both of these are bipartisan. The reason I'm bringing this up is because there's a certain dimension of leadership, actually a positive dimension of leadership that India brings to the table, and India. Now with India's rise, I think this is an aspect that can be really very, very positive for the globe overall. And this is where I think, therefore, given the able leadership that the United States has provided, over the last several decades, there is clearly again, areas where actually India and US can work together, both for mutual, benefits, but also for the benefit of the global economy as well.
Right. I must ask you a question, given that you're directly responsible for IMF in South Asia. So India, of course, its own neighborhood, has its own challenges, but economically speaking, at least two of India's neighbors, Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, have gone through a very, very difficult time.
Yeah.
What are you expecting in India's immediate neighborhood in terms of how the economy in these two countries is doing?
So two of the countries that you mentioned, actually, they're part of my portfolio. Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, both of them actually started, IMF aid programs after I actually assumed office here within a few months. And, the Sri Lankan program has been going very well. There's been some significant reform that's been done, by the Sri Lankan government. Of course, the previous government and the current government as well. And I think they're quite committed to ensuring that that overall some of the aspects basically of the program are adhered to. Bangladesh is also, a country where actually there's been a program that's, of course, there's been some uncertainty in recent times, but I think overall that would be something that will be overcome. And I think the program that basically Bangladesh is going through also will help stabilize Bangladesh, and thereby these two countries, I think, are important neighbors for India. So IMF is actually very strongly involved in supporting both of these economies.
Subramanian, India and the United States, they collaborate on several multilateral forums, whether it's the WTO, whether it's the IMF, and several such other bodies. Yeah. But recently we've seen how, United States has, been trying to pull out of some of them, for instance, WHO. What is the impact this has? Because on issues pertaining to, say, for instance, agriculture, there are still differences between India and United States. How does that process of consultation, of coordination carry on if there is pulling out of such multilateral forums?
So I think, Madhav, India and the US are a partnership that is quite naturally, one of mutual gains. Even though this may sound like a cliche, but it is a fact that the world's oldest democracy and the world's largest democracy clearly have benefits from working together. At the same time, also, if you look at the opportunity that India now has in the next couple of decades, I think American investors actually can benefit substantially, especially the kind of public digital infrastructure that India has created, which really enables American investors to also come and actually contribute to the India story and thereby benefit as well. That's the way I broadly view the India-US partnership. Now, specifically in terms on the multilateral fora, I think while some specific institutions that you actually mentioned may be something that may be in conversation, the fact remains that when it comes from an economic perspective, I think India and US continue to work together on many of these institutions, be it actually the IMF or the World Bank or some of the other economically related international institutions.
Right. India has also been positioning itself, as an alternative to global supply chains that emanate from China. We've got the PLI model. How do we see that panning out now, particularly, of course, with India also announcing its own economic corridor from here on, so on and so forth. How do you see that actually?
I think that's a wonderful opportunity because, President Trump has emphasized how he wants to actually increase the presence of manufacturing, in the United States. And in India as well, we have been really working very hard to improve manufacturing. And I think there, in my opinion, actually there is significant complementarity, because some of the high value-added manufacturing can actually be done in the US, and some of the more labor-intensive manufacturing can actually be done in India. And therefore, there is a natural synergy there that can be utilized significantly. Of course, I think from the Indian side, and as I've been saying before as well, many of our states need to do reforms, because from a manufacturing perspective, if you think about the 6 inputs that manufacturing sector firms need: land, labor, capital, ease of doing business, power, and transportation. Of that, 5 of those are basically state-level jurisdiction. So we can really, enable this process significantly. I think there is a huge opportunity here for, given the synergies, and so states, especially some of the more, developed states, reforming, I think, will really help us in fructifying this opportunity.
Right. India, sends about 200,000 or 2 lakh students a year to the United States, spending about $7 billion odd, worth of money. Skill development, of course, undoubtedly a very important issue. But how do you see the recent developments actually impacting? Because India also has a massive Indian American community, which has also been successful, not just in politics, but also in the bureaucracy. Yes. Do you see the recent changes politically in any way affecting the Indian American community, sir?
So I think if you look at the Indian American community, and this is where Indian Americans actually sort of not only distinguish themselves in the in the diaspora, overall global diaspora, but compared to other countries as well, the Indian Americans are actually, not only are they incredibly well educated, they're professionally qualified, and they're actually now many of the tech CEOs are Indian. And so the fact that India actually brings a lot of technical competence and professional competence is something that is really well established here, and that is a clear win-win, because that kind of expertise is something that the United States has benefited from over the over the decades as well. And I think if you look at the what President Trump has been saying as well, he really wants to encourage skilled professionals coming into this country. So I don't think that aspect will actually be impacted overall. Some of the other things that basically, in terms of, I think, on immigration, etc., that is being focused on, that will not have an impact on skilled immigration, really.
All right. Mr. Subramanian, thank you so much for talking to us here at Times Now. Thank you.